Well, sorry, it took me a while. Just readjusting the camera to improve enhance video quality. Welcome to a new segment here on the podcast. And we're going to be taking a look back at a past AFL season. And this one, we are looking back at one of the greatest seasons of all time. 1993. It was a season like no other. Who would have thought at the start of the year, not after losing by 147 points in the Foster's Cup, North Melbourne would actually make the finals? And we're on top of the ladder halfway through the season. Well, all it took was a coaching change in March. Wayne Schimmelbusch was sacked. Dennis Pagan was hired. And that was the decision that turned North Melbourne into a relevant club once again. Well, let's hope Clarko's going to do the same thing 32 years later. Or 34 years later. West Coast made the finals for the fourth straight year. Adelaide made the finals for the very first time. The competition was well and truly national. There were some coaches sacked, like Gary Baccanara getting the boot after round 4. As Sydney would lose 18 straight games. Picking up where they left off from their disastrous 92 season they had. Losing the last 15 games of the season. Baccanara was sacked. And who would have thought they would appoint the master coach, Ron Barassi, heading into the round 7 clash against Carlton. There have been some close games during the season. Like Fitzroy needing a last-minute miracle against Carlton in round 1 to get up by 6 points in the closest game of the round. Stephen Kernahan had the chance to win it for Carlton in round 2 against eventual premiers Essendon. But the game would end as a draw, as he had missed everything. Footscray won a close contest just down the road at Princes Park against Melbourne by 8 points. But all the way at the other side of the state, which is Waverley Park, St Kilda won a close game against North Melbourne. Well, just across the road from Princes Park, which is Victoria Park, Collingwood got up by 10 against Geelong in a shootout between Gary Ablett and Peter Dacos. Ablett kicked 8 in the losing side. Dacos kicked 7 in a winning side. Let me check the statistics real quick. It was Dacos who kicked 8 in the win and Ablett kicked 7 in the loss. There was a new pit-up boy up forward that year. His name is Tony Mondra and he plays for the Adelaide Crows. He kicked 10 in the first round against Richmond to help the Crows win by 94 points. And that was the Richmond team fresh off of back in the Foster's Cup Grand Final. And they lost to the Bombers. Also earlier that year, well, there were some issues at the Waverley Park turf, which caused a few Foster's Cup games to be moved. Like Collingwood and Melbourne being moved to Princes Park. West Coast and St Kilda had their game moved to Subiaco. Saints and North and the Crows had to move their game to Footy Park. Essendon and Brisbane had their game moved to Canidia Park. Same with Footscray and Fitzroy. In round 3, Brisbane Bears played their very first game at the Gabba and won a close one against Melbourne on Easter Sunday. Footscray won a close one against Fitzroy thanks to the veteran Dougie Hawkins on game number 291. And there was another close one at the same ground 2 days later. Carlton beat Hawthorn by 2 points. Sticks Kernahan won the game for Carlton as he had another shot at redemption. And we're going to have to go back 1 week prior when, well, the 92 Premiers West Coast got toppled by the Crows at Footy Park. Speaking of Footy Park, the Crows had a very good game winning round 4. A 1-pointer against Fitzroy. It was one of the best games of the season. St Kilda won at Victoria Park for the first time since 1976 with a 22-point win over Collingwood. That game was made famous by Nicky Winmar making a stand for his people after he was racially abused by a Collingwood fan. And that was the same round Gary Buckenara's coaching days were over. He was sacked by the Sydney Swans. In round 5, the closest game of the round was Brisbane and Geelong at the Gabba. The Cats got up by just 1 point. Man, what a game that was. The Brisbane Bears dominated that last quarter. Roger Merritt kicked 7 that game for the Bears. Paul Spargo kicked 4. It was Charlie Spargo's dad. But Ablett kicked 8 and single-handedly won the game for Geelong. And that was a new match winner in that same round, Adrian McAdam, formerly of North Adelaide. He kicked 7 on debut against Richmond, while Jeff Hogg kicked 6 at the other end, with Chris Nash kicking 4 for the Tigers. Wayne Carey kicked 4 that match for North. A young Wayne Carey, who was was the youngest captain in the league that time. In round 6, well, Adelaide played out a pretty good game against Hawthorn at Footy Park, with Modra beating 7 and Dunstall beating 9. Dunstall won the game for Hawthorn at the other end. In that same game, a certain Johnny Platten played a very good game for Hawthorn, alongside another South Australian, Darren Jarman. It was known as a ruck battle between Pittman and Dare. That game was probably one of Paul Cooper's best games for Hawthorn. Also in round 6, Essendon had a 24-point win over Geelong. It was a game noted for Salmon kicking 10 goals, 6 at one end for the Bombers. Gary Ablett Sr. kicked 14-7 at the other end for Geelong. Although the Bombers won by 24 points, Gary Ablett won by 25 points against Paul Salmon. North Melbourne got up by 124 against the Swans, with McAdam beating 10 in just his second match. Fitzroy would get up by a point the next week against Melbourne at Princes Park. West Coast played out a thrilling win against Geelong at the Cattery in the 1992 Grand Final rematch. And it was the round famous for Ron Barassi's first game coaching Sydney, as he would add discipline back to the Swans, as they needed it after losing 20 in a row. The more notable moments of round 8 was the Brisbane Bears winning by 162 points against the Swans on the Sunday, thanks to 8 goals from Roger Merritt and another 8 goals, this time from Michael Murphy, ex-Crows player. Brendan McCormack kicked 4 for the Bears. Fabian Francis, future Port Adelaide player, kicked 3. Well, the Swans' best goal kicker that match was Simon Minton-Connell. However, just 3 hours later at Footy Park, the Crows got up by just 2 points against North Melbourne, with Modra taking, well, the mark of the 90s. In the commentary, he's like, Modra! What a mark! That's the mark of the year. All I can say now is no one can beat that. Carey kicked 5 that match for the Roos. McAdam 3. Mark Roberts 3. Lombard was held goalless. Matty Robert kicked 4 as well for the Crows. The notable moment of round 9. Well, it would be one of them would be Richard Osborne going down, well, concussed against Geelong in round 9, and he was taken to Royal Sydney Hospital. And another notable moment in that round was that Melbourne West Coast game at the MCG. Alan Jakovich booted that goal for Melbourne, and to his icing on the cake, he planted a kiss towards his brother Glenn. With that, just level the scores. Man, what a hectic goal that was. Round 10. West Coast got up by a kick against St Kilda. Tim Watson was back for Essendon. He played a notable role in their 4-point win over Fitzroy at the MCG on Friday night. And that's the end of this scene.
Are you recording live?
There was.
Oh,
sorry.
no, come in here.
Right, son?
Yeah, this is me.
Let's start it off you, mate.
Yeah, anyways, now for the second half of the season for 1993 retro look back. That year there was a State of Origin carnival happening in June, with the first game was Victoria winning by 65 points against the New South Wales ACT combined side. The next day at Footy Park, South Australia got up by 36 points against Western Australia. The next day in the final for that one, South Australia got their first win at the MCG since 1963, winning by 12 points against Victoria. Meanwhile, the next day at Bellerive Oval in Hobart, Queensland's Northern Territory combined team won by 34 points themselves against Tasmania. There were some notable names in these sides. South Australia had Andrew Jarman, Mark Beckley, Andrew Mackay, Tony Modra, Nigel Smart, Tony Francis, Matty Robin, McGuinness and McDermott. Gavin Wanganang was on that side. There was a lot of good names on that team. Greg Anderson and Johnny Platten only played against WA. Sticks only played against Victoria. It was a great way to show. It was a great way to showcase football. They should be able to bring in that idea when it's time for gather round. Round 11. Well, Craig Bradley picked up where he left off from the state game and got that running goal at the G against Geelong. The next 2 days later at Waverley, well, the league was starting to take notice of the Baby Bombers, as they had a win against an upset win over Hawthorn, with a young James Hird playing well this one. In round 12, seen a few close games. It was the first more noted Wayne Carey versus Glenn Jakovich battle, when West Coast and North Melbourne versed each other at the Wacker. North got up by 6 points. Meanwhile, on that Sunday at the Cattery, Geelong won by 7 against Fitzroy. Another close match of the round. And that was the round where I remember key administrator Alan Schwab. He sadly passed away in his Sydney hotel room after he was overseeing the rebuild of the Sydney Swans. In round 13, well, North Melbourne had their chance to beat Hawthorn for the first time since 1984. But they would lose by just 3 points after Jason Dunstall kicked the winning goal. Also in that round, well, there was another notable moment happened. The Sydney Swans finally registered a win. With a 40-point win over Melbourne. Well, the one that kind of let Melbourne down up forward that game was Alan Jakovic. He kicked 1 goal 6. If he had kicked straight, Melbourne the Swans would have been winless. But Richard Osborne responded with 10 at the other end to be the match winner to Sydney. In round 14, another close one happened. Fitzroy by a point against North Melbourne. West Coast lose by just a point against Carlton. After Chris Maywaring missed the chance to win it after the siren at Subiaco. In round 15, North Melbourne and Essendon started off their rivalry. That brewed for the late 90s and into towards the early 2000s. With a 38-point win in favour of North Melbourne. Gary Ablett once again kicked 10 in a losing side against Melbourne. Yeah, he did kick, another notable moment, he kicked 10 in a losing side against Adelaide. But Tony Mudra unfortunately got 1 at the other end. But luckily the Crows got up. With Nigel Smart being their main match winner with 5. In round 16, well, Tony Modra was our Modra that night. 13 goals against the Tigers at Footy Park. Also, it wasn't just Modra who was booting 10. Sav Rucker booted 10 against Footscray the next day at Victoria Park. It was not just Modra. It was not just the full forwards who were kicking 10 that day. Even Stephen Silvani, the full back, kicked 10 goals against Fitzroy, as Carlton won by 86 points. It wasn't just the main goal kickers, wasn't just the big goal kickers in that one. St Kilda had almost the whole team kicking goals. Craig O'Brien kicked 6-1 for the Saints. Gordon Foe kicked 5 goals, 9. If he kicked straight, he would have got 10. Gary Ablett kicked 5 for Geelong in a losing side. Riccardi kicked 4. The notable game of the round was Essendon and West Coast at the MCG. Paul Salmon would win the game for Essendon with just a few minutes left. He was quiet all game. He wasn't playing well all game. In round 17, Geelong had an 8-point win over Collingwood at Waverley, which almost got Collingwood out of the 8. While Hawthorn were top of the lap, Hawthorn were the new ladder leaders in round 17, winning by 92 points against the Swans at Waverley on Sunday, with Dunstall kicking 9 and Paul Hudson kicking 8. While Sydney's main goal kicker was Richard Osborne. In round 18, Gary Ablett was the first one to reach 100 goals, as Geelong would win by 94 points against North Melbourne. The next day, there was another full forward that made headlines. There was a farmyard pig by the name of Plugger Lockett running onto the SCG in trying to replace the absent Plugger Lockett. And in the words of Sandy Roberts at times, there's a pig on the ground. There is a pig at full forward. Looks like a large white wearing race cross. Dennis Cometti was saying, as an expert on the field, it's a good thing you'll hear, oh, he's on the lead. Get the runner out there and pick up the pig. And Darren Hobbs picked it up in a match-defining tackle. I think it did kind of help Sydney to come back a little bit, although they were down by 52 at half time and down by 60 on at the last change. However, I think the Swans dominated that last quarter, only to lose by 37 points. Round 19, Tony Modra registered for ton. as Adelaide would only lose by 5 points against Fitzroy. If they'd kicked straight, they would have won. Collingwood they did not kick straight and still got the win. 10 goals 20 against the Saints. Well, luckily for them, Saints kicked 9-14. If the Saints had kicked straight, Collingwood would have lost. Meanwhile, in round 20, the Saints won an upset at Princes Park against Carlton. The Crows, they had one of the most behinds kicked for a winning side. 13 goals 27 to Melbourne 6-10. Crazy. It was a crazy season that was. If the Crows had kicked straight, they would have won by 100 points. Tony Modra kicked 4-9 that match. If he had kicked straight and the Crows had kicked straight entirely, the Crows would have won by like 129 points. And would have pretty much ended Melbourne's season with them having a low percentage. In round 21, Melbourne did respond well with a huge win against Richmond. Jason Dunstall kicked the ton against the Crows. Geelong nearly disrupted Essendon's season by winning at the Cattery. Collingwood's season was pretty much over after a 54-point loss against Carlton. And this was back when Carlton were a good side. While for Footscray, they won by 42 against the Eagles. Round 22, there was a few notable games in that one. The Blues got up by a point against Sydney, the bottom side of the competition. North Melbourne lose by 12 against Footscray. Ilya Grigic, Ben Sexton and Chris Grant combined for 16 goals. As for North Melbourne, Adrian McAdam, Mark Roberts, Wayne Carey and Brad Allison all combined for 14 goals. But it was not enough for North Melbourne. The Crows, they had a pretty good win themselves in the last round. They needed a win over Collingwood to make the finals. They got up by 24 points. The Crows led all game, except in the first quarter when Collingwood were up by 26 at quarter time. Well, it's not just the regular season was pretty good, but the finals was good as well. Come finals time, well, North Melbourne, top of the ladder all season, eliminated by reigning premiers West Coast. Carlton got up by just 2 points in the first ever night final against the Bombers. Hawthorn and Adelaide. Well, Adelaide got up by 15 points against Hawthorn, and that was a game that saw the Allen combination at Hawthorn of Joyce and Jean's era come to an end, as Joyce was sacked. Carlton would win their second semi against the Crows of Waverley by 18 points. Bombers got up by 32 against West Coast. Then there was the preliminary final that blew the premiership race wide open. At halftime in the prelim, Adelaide were up by as many as 42 points. Looking like Adelaide are going to the grand final to verse Carlton. But that wasn't the case. Essendon came back at the second half to win by 11 points. Who would then go on to win it the next week against Carlton. Ablett finished the season winning the Coleman medal. The Brownlow medalist was Gavin Wanganeen. He was the first ever First Nations player to win it. The Norm Smith medalist was another first-time First Nations player, Michael Long. The Michael Tuck medal was also won by a First Nations player, Gavin Wanganeen. That was a year of change, and that's the end of the video.